We're going to begin the third and final installment of this class, of this of these sessions on Rav Kook and his work, his seminal work, Orot, which I have here, which has been the basis of all of our talks. And instead of recapping Rav Kook's life and career as we did in the first class and in the second class, we're going to do something different. We're going to begin this class by talking about the fourth year Ziegler course in philosophy with Rabbi Elliot Dorff that I referenced last time. And in that fourth year class, you would all write a paper that would compare the rational medieval philosophy of Maimonides, Rambam, with the, what I like to call, romantic medieval philosophy of Yehuda Halevi. You'd make a giant chart and lots of categories to discuss different moments, different points of inflection between the two of them in which they would disagree. And then you would write one's opinion about it, the other's opinion about it. For instance, right, Yehuda, the moment of revelation at Sinai, described in Exodus 19, 20, in those chapters. The question of what they can make of it, what? Rambam's proof that there was revelation at Sinai in terms of a rational philosopher, his proof that the Jews received the Torah at Sinai as described is that we have a Torah in the Ark today, right? That the Torah is here, we have it, and until we have a better understanding of how we got the Torah, we should go with the story that we all know, right? He's not sure, he has no proof that the story took place exactly as we have it in the Torah, but as the facts have it, we have the Torah and we have the story. Yehuda Halevi, right, in terms of revelation, would say that the proof of the story is not only that the story appears in the Torah and we don't have a better story, it's that the first generation of Jews at Sinai told that story to the second generation. The third generation, they were in religious schools like our ECLC here, and they were sitting in tents in Joshua's era in settling the land of Israel, like let's say 1200, 1100 before the Common Era, and they were told that we received this Torah at Mount Sinai, and it happened that the cloud of glory of God came down to the mountain, and there was lightning and thunder, and there was shofar blasts, and everything is described in the Torah, and we received the Torah. They went home and they told their parents the story, and the parents, only one or two generations removed, didn't refute it. That nowhere in chain of tradition did any generation step forward and say, no, my grandparents and my great-grandparents, they never told that story. They never told that. That story's not true. That's made up by your teachers. That never happened. Yehuda Halevi says, relying on our own people, and I don't know if you know this about our people, but we're kind of chutzpahdik. We're kind of, if we don't believe something, we speak out pretty quickly. The fact that at no point after the Jews left Egypt, received the Torah, entered the land of Israel with Joshua, began to settle the land, the rise of King David in approximately 1000 BCE, at no point did the Jewish people turn around and say, we have no idea where that story came from. And because all of those first generations never questioned it, and this second generation never questioned it, and the third generation didn't question it, and the fourth, Yehuda Halevi in 1100 or the 11th or 12th century of the Common Era, comes along as a romantic medieval Jewish philosopher and says, who are we to question it now 2,000 years later? Right? So you would have two different boxes next to Revelation, Rambam Maimonides on one side with his explanation of trusting revelation, Yehuda Halevi's on the other. And we come back, and the reason I want to bring this up is because we come to the significance of the land of Israel that I briefly discussed last time, right? And Maimonides and Yehuda Halevi, each in theory would stand on the border, right, with 1 foot into Egypt and 1 foot into Israel, or 1 foot into Jordan, 1 foot into Israel. And they would scoop up land from each side of the border. And Maimonides, as a rational thinker, as a scientist, as a physician, would look at the 2 pieces of soil that he's holding in his hands, these 2, handfuls of dirt, and he would say to himself that the 2 are the same. That's exactly right. Thank you for answering. Yeah. The same, right? The 2 pieces of earth are the same. They are, let's say, just separated by 10 feet. One's on one border, one's on the other, but the earth itself is the same. And Yehuda Halevi would scoop up the same 2 handfuls of earth, and he would say, it's different. It's 100% different, right? And Yehuda Halevi would say that this piece of earth from the land of Israel is spiritually connected to our being in a way that the other one is not. And the way that I know that Yehuda Halevi has merit his argument is when I was a little boy, long before the modern Ben Gurion airport, when you would pull up in a modern jetliner and you walk out into a terminal like every other airport in the world. Before that, my first time going to Israel, the jetliner pulled up and the door opened and there was the stairwell that met the airplane. And people got off the airplane, they walked down the stairs, and they got to the ground, which was the tarmac of the airport. And what did they do? They kissed the ground. That's exactly right. They kissed the ground. These were not religious people. I'm talking about these weren't ultra-Orthodox people. As a matter of fact, they were specifically not. They were secular, conservative, reform, American Jews coming to Israel. And for whatever reason, Yehuda Halevi's explanation rang true in their kishkis, that they felt like when they touched the land of Israel for the first time, they should kneel down and kiss it and say Shechianu for the first time visiting. This is a very, very powerful connection that we have tried to make sense of for thousands of years. Thousands of years. Is it a historical connection? Is it a sociological connection? Is it an anthropological connection? Is it a spiritual, sanctified connection that the Jewish people shares with that piece of land? Did you have a question, Louise? They also searched you, right, when you got off the airplane. That's exactly right. So in Israel, they like searching people. So they search you when you get off, they search you when you get on. That's exactly right. The security there is, it's of a different level. So the reason I bring this up about this difference of philosophies, and number one, I always like talking about Rabbi Dorff, but number two, when we read what Rav Kook wrote tonight, which is focused on the land of Israel itself, this in many ways is a continuation of a thread of thinking that's existed for our people for a long time. He's not the first to say these things about the land of Israel, and yet he comes along at a very specific context in the history of the Jewish narrative, in the beginning of the 20th century. And when he says it, he's talking to an audience that is, in fact, moving there with a sense of permanence and with a sense of modern self-determination, enlightenment, that's different than previous generations before him. So, I'm going to move to the last week, just to go through these real fast, the first week we discussed God, and we discussed healthy national instincts, where we pulled out kind of 2 theses from the teachings, right? Humanity has a surviving inheritance in the people of Israel, and the battle of existence makes its way in the material as well as the spiritual realm. To pull those 2 out, to understand all of Rav Kook's thinking. Then, in the second week, If you're following on YouTube, I think it's titled Rav Kook Session 2. We talked about redemption, geula, and we talked about shuvah, of returning, and how those two spiritual concepts, one from Passover of geula, of redemption, the other from Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, are actually brought into Rav Kook's writings not in the way that we normally refer to them in terms of the spiritual holiday relationship, but rather into the spiritual, physical, political, Zionist relationship that he sees running through all of it. And today we're going to focus on the land of Israel, and we're going to end with a conversation about universalism and particularism, which I thought is apropos because it is at the heart of today's conversations about Israel in 2023. The idea of, is the Jewish people like everybody else, or are we like nobody else? And so, any questions before we begin with this teaching? Fantastic. Okay. The land of Israel. Eretz Yisrael inena devar chitzoni. The land of Israel is not an external thing. Okay? Not an external national asset, a means to an end of collective solidarity and strengthening of the nation's existence, physical or even spiritual. So for people who think they live in Europe and Israel is far away, Rav Kook comes along and says, it's not an external thing like that. When you think of Israel, you should not think in the same terms of when you think of London or when you think of New York. It's not just a place. Okay, well, if you read this sentence, so it's not just a place, it's a national place. It's a place for our people. No, it's not even a place for our people. That's still other. Well, maybe it's a place for a refuge, as he puts it, a collective solidarity, the strengthening of the national existence. Nope. He says, that's not it either. It's not something over there that gives us spirituality over here. The land of Israel is an essential unit. Eretz Yisrael hi chativa atzmutit, kshura bekesher chayim im ha'umah. It's bound by the bond of the life of the nation, united by inner characteristics with its existence. The land of Israel is something that lives deep within each of us as a Jewish person, as a member of the Jewish people. When we visit the land of Israel, it is simply the physicality of what already exists deep inside. And so it's moving for people to land in Israel for the first time and visit. And by the way, we're going to have a trip to Israel for first-timers and families, if anybody would like to come, at the end of July. My wife and I are leading the group. It is the realization of what already exists deep inside you. The idea that you feel connected to Jewish people, when you land in Israel, you are simply recognizing the physicality of that connection that already exists. When you think deep inside about history, Israel is Jewish history. Israel is the place where Jewish history comes alive. When you think deep inside about what it would mean to have a home where all Jewish people would come and feel comfortable, Rav Kook says, this is the place. And simply, you're going there and you finally recognize the couch. You've heard stories about your grandparents' home with the couches with the plastic on it for so many years. So many years. And now, for the first time, when you land in Israel, you get to finally walk into the picture in your mind that you've had that lives deep inside you. And it's simply a physical representation of what already lives deep inside each of us. Therefore, it is impossible to appreciate the content of the sanctity of the land of Israel, to actualize the depth of love for her by some human, rational understanding. And who is he speaking to in the context of his life? He's speaking to the Enlightenment thinkers. He's thinking to the French nationalists and the English nationalist and the German nationalist and the Italian nationalist. And he's saying that our form of nationalism is profoundly different. Different. We're not exactly like you. We're not exactly like you. The idea that a Frenchman is, screams out liberté and runs through the streets and eats baguettes and all the great things that are in, which is one of our favorite family, Les Miserables. I'm thinking of Les Miserables, right? The idea that when you watch Les Miserables, that is relatable to any story of any people, Rav Kook would say it's true, and for the Jewish people, there's an entirely different level going on. Beyond human rational understanding. Our connection to that land is beyond human rational understanding. I would argue if he's not a rationalist, it makes him a romantic, right? Not an irrationalist, because I wouldn't call him that. I wouldn't call any philosopher an irrationalist, but a romantic. And in that sense, he doesn't need to justify himself like Rambam of if there was a different way that maybe there's a better answer, a different answer, a scientific answer. He's saying from the outset, he is a romantic. This is an artist, a poet, all of those things. And Rav Kook says that it is not the same as Enlightenment nationalism. It's Enlightenment plus. It is only through the divine spirit which is in the soul of Israel. And if you want to understand that last sentence, he says that the soul of the Jewish people and the land of Israel is connected through a bond of sanctity. The special quality that we started in the beginning when he said that Knesset Yisrael, or the Jewish people at large, the gathering of the people, right, where how did he put it? The surviving inheritance of humanity, right? The goodness that's left for humanity. Here, the goodness, the soul of that goodness of humanity is God, and God is the quality about the land that makes it special, and that is the eternal bond between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. And I added this beautiful little picture here of Israel just for everybody to recognize what we're talking about. Is there any questions about this little segment of Orot chapter 1? Now in the third class, we're now beginning, this is the very first page of this book, of his writings, Orot. We've come right back to the beginning. He starts with the land of Israel, and I've decided to end his class by going to the beginning, first teaching those other subjects first. Okay. That's exactly right, Louise. It is, the question, their statement was, it is such an emotional experience when one goes to Israel, especially for the first time. I would argue every time, but yes, it is an incredibly emotional experience. It is an emotional experience. Rav Kook continues, and I think that at the core of it, Rav Kook is trying to explain that emotion to it, right? That emotion that he felt as somebody who returned twice, right? Once he returned and moved there to Jaffa to become the chief rabbi, and once he came back out of being kept away because of World War I, being trapped in Europe. Right, so the question is, do younger people experience that to any extent because they can go on birthright and Ulpan at very early age and they can do it for free or for reduced price? I think that they do experience that. I don't think that they experience the same emotion that their parents and grandparents felt before them. But I think that Israel is not in the same sort of jeopardy that it was, thank God, generations ago. And it is, by and large, a reality that people grow up with. So the lack of emotion is the missing quality of miracle, right? In the same sense that when people who built VBS walk into this building and take such pride in the way that the building looks and the campus feels, and they walk me around and they say, at one point, the synagogue was just this section, and then they built this section, and then they built this section, and that parking lot wasn't always there, and the grounds weren't there, and the school wasn't there, and this, that, and the other, and they can see all the progress, and it becomes very emotional. I think that when younger families walk onto the campus for the first time to enroll their kids in the ECC and religious school and day school, they take it for granted, of course, that everything is here, that this campus looks the way that it does. And they don't have the same appreciation for the generations that built this place into what it is. They are here as the next generation, and they take for granted that this is where we stand now, and they look to where we're going to be in 20, 25 years. And Israel is no different. Israel is that kind of national cathedral where people show up, and especially young Jewish people, and the question is, there's an appreciation, of course, but it's not the same awe, I don't think, that their parents and grandparents felt. Your children all went before you did. That's right. I went at the same time as my parents did. We all went together for the first time, and now I've been to Israel probably 3 to 4 times as many times as my parents have in total, maybe twice, and I have to tell you that I just take it for granted that I can go to LAX, get on a plane, and arrive in Israel 15 to 20 hours later, and it's all there. Your grandson's getting married in Tel Aviv. Well, amazing. I hope I get invited. Please let me. So we'll keep going with chapter 1. The thought of the land of Israel is only an external value, serving as a cohesive force. Even when it comes only to reinforce the Jewish idea in the diaspora, to preserve its identity and to strengthen faith, awe, and observance of mitzvot, bears no permanent fruit, for this foundation is shaky compared to the holy might of the land of Israel. If he was speaking in the previous paragraph to Enlightenment thinkers, nationalists throughout Europe, this paragraph, who is he speaking? To whom is he speaking? He's speaking to religious Jews in Europe. If you intend to only use Israel as an idea that you say in the Birkat HaMazon, right? Uvenei Yerushalayim ira kodesh b'mhera v'amenu, and the city of Jerusalem, please build it, hurried in our day. Baruch atah Adonai boneh barachamav Yerushalayim amen. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Lord our God, the builder of Jerusalem with compassion. What would Rav Kook say to that? Jerusalem's not just some idea that you're supposed to reference in your prayers far away. Jerusalem's a place. It's built. It might not be completely built, he would say, because there's not a temple there, but it's built, and it's built for us to be there as Jews. And so if you only intend for Israel to be used as a symbol in your prayers, even as a force to reinforce Jewish observance in the diaspora, even if Israel, all that Israel is a place on the wall, on the eastern wall, to remind you that this is the direction you're supposed to pray. You have to understand it's not just the direction you're supposed to pray, it's the direction you're supposed to go. If one paragraph is intended for the secular, enlightened world, the other one is intended for the Jewish religious world, to say Israel is more than the way that you reference it on a regular basis. If you just do that and focus on the awe and the observance of mitzvot, if you just study Israel in terms of halachic observance, in terms of the laws that you derive from living in Israel versus the laws that you live in the diaspora, that bears no permanent fruit. Right? That's just a very temporary relationship. The foundation is shaky compared to the holy might of the land itself. The true strengthening of the Jewish idea in exile will come about only through the depth of its immersion in the land of Israel. And here, immersion is used in the same word as when Jews go into the mikveh to cleanse themselves. Israel, to Rav Kook here, and he uses Israel in his writings as a bunch of different Jewish metaphors, Jewish analogies. In this one, when speaking to the religious community, Israel is like the mikveh that's actually going to cleanse them, right? To the secular, enlightened world, Israel is more. It's the plus status of nationalism, so you understand what Israel is. To the religious world, so you understand what Israel is. Israel is the great place you can immerse yourself. You can have an immersion into the water that is Israel, and Israel will rejuvenate you. Tzfiyat Yeshua hi koach ha'ma'amid shel ha'yehudit ha'galutit. The expectation of salvation is the force that preserves exilic Judaism. Jews in exile live in exile as a result of an expectation of salvation, right? That we will be saved. The idea that we expect to be saved is what allows us to live in all these other places. When the salvation itself, he says, is the land. When you go to the land of Israel, you don't expect salvation because you live in salvation. Now, I would say that truth, the last sentence, I put it in Hebrew, Eretz Yisrael hi Yeshua atzma, it exists on two levels. First, his philosophical, theological level. And second, I would argue that the act of becoming Israeli, even in his pre-state Israelism, required that Jews begin to not rely on others to save them, but rely on themselves, to save themselves. And so he has taken what he's seen in the land of Israel. He's taken the idea that boys and girls would actually go to a high school in Tel Aviv, the first high school called the gymnasium, where of course it would be taken for granted that Jews would learn history and philosophy and language arts and sciences and math. But for Jews to learn physical education, to run and play sports, to become a different kind of Jewish person in the land of Israel, to become teenagers and learn how to defend a piece of land, how to defend a nation, how to defend an idea, how to not cry out for another to come defend us, but rather to rely on ourselves. In his mind, Israel forces us to save ourselves. And Israel, therefore, the land of Israel, is in itself salvation. The Jewish people act differently in Israel than they do in other places in the world. It looks like you had a question or you had something to say. That's correct. He is noticing, just to repeat your comment, he is noticing the difference of the way Jews behave, secular Jews as well. There always is friction between the secular and the religious communities. Now, in Israel, back then, there was also a degree of friction, but he spent his life trying to reduce that amount of friction. We need him now, more than ever. In all honesty, the reason why I think he becomes more and more increasingly relevant, and the reason why religious Zionism, whether or not it's his signature on it anymore, continues to speak to a segment of the population in Israel is because they should not be at odds, right? In theory, religion, the Jewish religion, and the Zionist idea should not be a choice. It's a false choice. The idea that someone should be either ultra-Orthodox, living in Mea Shearim, and not participating in Israel in any way, in the IDF or in any kind of national institutions, or that you live in Tel Aviv and you never go to synagogue and you never wear a kippah, you never experience anything Jewish, right, other than going to the beach, right? The idea that you have to choose between one and the other, Rav Kook says no, you don't. And Rav Kook says that those Jews in Tel Aviv are religious, and those Jews in Jerusalem should be participating in the national entity, in the national enterprise. And we probably need his advice now more than ever as a Jewish people, both there and here and around the world. Thank you. Does that answer your question? You've got all kinds of family? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. No, so explained that your family in Israel is divided between the group that never wants to go to Jerusalem and the group that lives in Jerusalem. And right. 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 Even religious people go to the beach. Yeah. So I think everybody who has family in Israel experiences that to a certain extent between the religious in Israel and the non-religious in Israel. When I go to Israel, just to give everybody an idea, and I meet my cousins in Tel Aviv, and they usually come to the hotel like on Shabbos afternoon. They, of course, I think that they view me as like a complete religious zealot because on Shabbos I stay, around the hotel or wherever, and we order lunch at the hotel where we don't have and we meet there instead of going out to a restaurant somewhere in Tel Aviv or getting in a cab and going somewhere to meet them somewhere else. So, whereas here, someone might not view me as a religious zealot. In their minds, I'm extraordinarily religious because I make those decisions. And that's the funny part about going to Israel today is I think that people imagine I think more than 60% of the population considers themselves to be secular. More than 60, I believe more than 60% of the population believes themselves to be secular, chiloni, not religious, right? And that I don't think most Jewish people that visit Israel for the first time expect it to be as secular as it is throughout the majority of the country. Which is why some of the move by these most recent elections that reinforce the idea that a kind of religious agenda might be pressed onto everyone in terms of buses not running on Shabbat and a lot of the national institutions being closed and mostly focuses on, Shabbat observance. People feel like they are being trampled. And I think that it makes for a very good national debate in terms of what role should Judaism play in a Jewish state. Okay? Now, most people who watch two Israelis debate assume that they're screaming at each other, right? But I think that, a healthy debate on the floor of the Knesset, it doesn't look like what we imagine debate to look like, but I think that that is exactly what the best version of this moment could be in the land of Israel today, is that there be a healthy debate about these types of issues that I think the population itself is struggling with domestically. As many other countries are, and right, and I think that Israel is not divorced from the world in the sense that, right? I mean, we here experienced many of the things that just occurred there in the election. We had populist candidates win high office. Europe had a whole sweep of populism that run through Europe in national elections, the rise of a religious segment of the population. All of these ideas are happening there as well, except when it happens in Hungary or Italy, it's not our family. And so we don't pay as close attention as when it's happening, according to Rav Kook, in our house to our family. And that's why it feels different. But I really do think that a lot of the issues that were touched upon in this past election that caused the rise of a lot of these candidates are issues that people have wanted to talk about for a long time, but they've been in many ways off the table. So this is the land of Israel. This is the land of Israel. And so Rav Kook begins his work by addressing two very different populations whom he actually travels around the world and debates and teaches and lectures to throughout his career. The religious community, the Orthodox community throughout Europe, and the secular, educated community throughout Europe. He makes a career of going and he addresses and speaking to them, and he addresses them both in this first chapter, the essay entitled The Land of Israel. To turn our attention now to particularism and universalism, we're going to end with this little paragraph that's going to wrap up the class, and it's going to bring us, I think, into modernity. And again, this is chapter 3, so this is now the third essay that he wrote in the book. And again, I've taken you now from almost back to front in so many ways. Yetzira Atzmit Yisraelit, independent Israelite creation, in thought, in life, in action, is only possible in the land of Israel. So, these words that Rav Kook writes, these words were spoken not too long ago by Shimon Peres, then president of the land of Israel, in the very last, I forget the actual name, but each year there's a ceremony in Israel where the president hands out awards of science to high school students. And he explained to them that the future of Israel is not dependent on the width of the land, the length of the land, but rather is dependent on the raising up the ideas of Israeli mind, the creation of these ideas and the innovation of the Jewish seichel in Israel will be the most creative and the most powerful of all Jewish creation in the world. Now, Shimon Peres is by no ways a religious person, right? He was a spiritual person. He was a pioneer. He was a founder of the country in so many ways. He's a hero. And I don't think this sounds that different than what people in Israel would think today. Is that if you took all of Silicon Valley, all the Jews from Silicon Valley, and you dropped them in Tel Aviv, not only would they have founded all of the social media applications that everybody uses in the world, Israelis would argue they would have done it better because it's in Tel Aviv. And there's a certain Marxism that belongs, a chutzpah in here, that is actually identifiably Israeli. In everything produced by Israel in the land, the universal form is subsumed under the unique form of Israel, and this is a boon for Israel and the entire world. So, in Israel, the particular gobbles up the universal in the Jewish people that come there. So you come with your baggage identity from Europe, from other places in the world, and you land in Israel, and suddenly, according to Rav Kook, Israel drops itself on you, and your identity is subsumed by the Israeli identity, and everything you do is a product of the land of Israel, and the world is better off because that's what happens to the Jewish people. Again, I think Israelis, leaders, for the most part, would probably agree with this paragraph today. The difference today, that's why I want to end here in this way, the difference is, I don't know that young American Jews would identify with this paragraph. I don't think they would think that this is truthful. I don't think that young people would think they come to Silicon Valley or they come to Tel Aviv, and if they go to Tel Aviv, their ideas are actually would explode in terms of, innovation and creativity in a way that it would happen in Silicon Valley, just to use one kind of poor example of this working out. Yes, you were about to say something. No? Okay, you were about to say something, but you'd like to hold it in. Okay. I think that the idea of particularism and universalism, first, in terms of the way that, especially I'm going to talk about American Jews, think about this idea, is that our particularism is the Jewish part of being an American Jew. And it's not some kind of potentiality by becoming Israeli. Is everybody following me so far? Yes? Right. Say it again in a different way. The battle between universalism and particularism in this country is the battle that we face for Jewish identity for young people today, right? Do they feel like everybody else as part of the world? When we go fight for social justice issues, are we the same as all other minority groups? Are we the same as do people think of themselves as Caucasian? How do you think of themselves as fitting part of the world? If they had to rank their different identities that they identify with, where would Judaism stack on the rankings of the identities? And if Judaism doesn't appear as one, meaning that I am defined most by this very particular family, tribal peoplehood, even as an American Jew, I define myself most, first and foremost, as a Jew, then I think that Rav Kook would have a lot to say about how that misguided that kind of universalist mentality is, that all different peoples are in this together. That we have a particular role to play that's different than other peoples. He would argue, even further than that if Jewish people really wanted to be their most creative, most brilliant, most lively selves, the place for them to do it is to move there. I always go back to the orange tree analogy that he uses in his other works, right? Orange tree can be planted anywhere, but the orange will taste the best if planted only in the atmosphere in which it's most conducive, which is why a Jaffa orange or a Florida orange tastes better than an Illinois orange, right? I don't know how many people here eat Illinois oranges. And so we get to this place where this reading, if we just change a few words, feels very, very contemporary to me in terms of I don't know what just happened to this, but it's okay. We're done with here it is. Feels very, very contemporary in the tension between universalism and particularism, I think, that young American Jews feel today here. I think young Israeli Jews also feel it there. That are they defined as part of, is there Israelism their definitive quality, or are they part of the larger Jewish people? for American Jews, it's not only the Jewish part, it's not only the contemporary part, it's the global society that young people feel themselves as a part of, right? Especially during movements of demonstrations and ideas like that, trying to push towards an era of greater justice. And I think that this whole debate between particularism and universalism sees itself beginning as early as the beginning part of the 20th century, where the question becomes, are we like everybody else, right? Which was what Napoleon asked of the rabbis that he convened in the council. Are Jews like other French people, or are you just like Jews? And when he convened this council of 70 rabbis, the leaders of the Jewish community, right? What did the rabbis basically say to him, as rabbis have said for a long time? Yes. Both. We're like them, and we're only like ourselves. And that's how we relate. And Rav Kook is saying, it's nice that everybody says that we've been saying that for a long time, and it's not necessarily true. If you want to be like ourselves, there's only one place where we can be like ourselves. Otherwise, you'll always live in this kind of tension between universalism and particularism. And Rav Kook would argue, even as an artist, even as a poet, even as a highly educated, enlightened person, goes around the world, travels, debates, that we should be striving to the highest level of particularism. And because that's the gift that we essentially offer the world. If we become like anybody else, then the Jewish people have nothing to offer. We have to view it as a gift. You're 100% right. That you're right. I don't think that I don't think that especially all Jews view it as a gift. I don't think that all peoples view it as a gift. And I think that we have to have a better understanding of what the gift is that we offer. That's right. Well, this is the very last teaching of Rav Kook. So I've taken you basically from the back section of the book all the way through the middle section to the front section. We've gotten a taste of Rav Kook studying 3 different chapters of his essays. And I would argue, I hope, that you have a better sense of why it is that people would want to study Rav Kook today. How his message is relevant today. His message of understanding between Jews of different backgrounds, different levels of religiosity, and his kind of giving the benefit of the doubt to the ideas that Jews come home, not because Tel Aviv is a beautiful beach town, but because there is something beyond rational understanding. There is a bond between Jews and Israel that is beyond words, right? And that bond that we can't describe, but we have the feeling, he would say that that is God, because in the first lesson I talked about Rav Kook's understanding that when this relation fills the heart and soul, you see the last line of the first paragraph, it fills them with love. When godliness shows up in the world correctly, we know it because we feel love. We feel love. And so when people end up in Israel and they feel that level of connection, and they feel like they love that place, he'll tell you through his writings that the connection that you feel that results in love has to be one of a divine nature, because that's how the process works. So you'll ask me, how is it that so many people heard Rav Kook's message and decided to not move to Israel? Okay? I would argue that any great prophet, right, whether it be the great prophets of the Bible, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, whether it be Rabbi Feinstein's example of a later 20th century thinker in Abraham Joshua Heschel, whether it be Rav Kook, any great prophet bangs their head against the wall because the frustration is that they can see the world, or they see a truth about the world so clearly, and nobody else sees it quite as clearly as they do. Had Rav Kook been successful in moving the entirety of the Jewish population to Israel, and by the way, some of those arguments made today about Jews being in Israel being the gift to the world, the boon to the world that he writes, I could point to passages in the Jewish State written by Theodor Herzl, who was a secular Viennese Jew from the later part of the 20th century, later part of the 19th century. He writes almost the identical words in the Jewish State in 1895. I can point you to parts of his writings that are clearly threads that are running through lots of different Zionist writings of the era. And had Jews listened to him and listened to Herzl and listened to lots of these thinkers, these prophets of their time, European Jewry would have moved, and ultimately we would have saved millions and millions of lives. They didn't. They weren't listened to. And so Rav Kook is left with this question. And the question is very simple. How can he explain that some Jewish people see it so clearly? They land in Israel, they touch the ground, they kiss the ground, and they stay forever. And some Jews come and visit Israel, they feel extraordinary connection, beyond words, beyond rational description. And yet, they leave, they go home. And some Jews come to Israel and, God forbid, feel little or no connection at all. And they go home. And he sees this reality play out, like all the other realities that we've discussed in this class. He sees the reality play out. And I'll end by just offering one of the writings that he wrote, a midrash, a kind of beautiful, beautiful story to explain the Torah, to explain this reality. He uses the Torah. It's concerning one of the sentences in the beginning of chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshit, Parshat Lech Lecha. That's the beginning of the call for Abraham to go to the land of Israel, right? Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladecha. Go forth from your land and your birthplace and your father's home to the land that I will show you. And Abraham and Sarah pick up and they just move. They start walking. They don't know where they're walking to, but they just start walking. They end up in Israel for only, in the land of Israel, in the Bible it's called Canaan. They end up in that land for only several verses. And in one of the verses it says that Abraham, in Hebrew the verbs are haloch v'nasoah. He travels all over, right? He traverses the land. I think if you read the old 1960s translation, he traverses the land. Rav Kook explains that every single place that Abraham and Sarah went, when they traversed the land, it wasn't that they went from city to city, it's that Abraham literally stepped in every square foot of the land of Israel. Every inch he touched. And as he touched every single inch, Rav Kook explains, he thought of every Jewish person that would ever live, all of his descendants, with Sarah. And as he stepped and touched different parts, he thought of different people, right? This piece of land, right, is for the Lebovitzes. This piece of land is for the Spitzers, right? This piece of land is for the Shawls. And the way the Rav Kook explains his reality is that he says, if someone lands in Israel and they travel throughout the land, and they touch the piece of land that Abraham touched, thinking of them, then they are compelled to stay. They feel it so much so that they were destined to be in this spot that they stay. And if someone comes to Israel and loves it and leaves, he explains that they got close to the spot, but they didn't touch the spot. Right? So your spot was, somewhere, 10 minutes outside of Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem you could feel the spot, but you didn't touch the actual spot, so you can leave because you didn't feel like you were destined to be in that spot. And if somebody doesn't feel compelled to even have a relationship with Israel the first time, it's because their spot was in a lot all the way in the south, and all they did was travel around the Golan Heights. They never got close. They never felt any connection. And so what does he say that you have to do next? And this is very contemporary thinking. If someone doesn't feel connection to Israel, what do they have to do? They have to go back. We can't give up on those people, he argues. He argues we have to push those people to do the very thing that they didn't enjoy the first time. They come back from Israel and they say, it was hot, I was schlepped around in a bus all day, I ate a big breakfast, but then didn't get a great lunch or dinner, and I really don't want to do that experience ever again. And we have to go to those people and say, you have to go back. You have to go back because for whatever reason, that first trip, you didn't realize a fundamental truth about who you are. And in that way, I think he also speaks very much to contemporary Judaism, in the sense that we have to keep pushing for more Jews to fall in love with this national home of ours. Even if it means that they're not going to live there forever, we have to push more of our people to understand that it's for all of us. And we need more people to advocate for it being for all of us. And so Rav Kook's philosophy is a gift that continues to give. I would argue continues to be more and more relevant with each passing year, each passing decade. His words should be revisited and re-understood and understood again and again and again. And I want to thank you for participating in these 3 sessions.